wait. No.
Listen.
Listen.
Wait.
I hate you for that.
Let me fix it.
Hello, and welcome back to Let Me Fix It, the podcast that says, hold up, we don't want to cause a riot. We just want to put you on the financial diet. I'm DeLon Grant. I'm an actor, a singer, and a photographer. And a writer as well. That happens too.
And I'm Franchesca Ramsey. I'm an actress, a producer, a writer, and former graphic designer. And this week, we have a very special guest. You know how much we love a multi-hyphenate up in this bitch. And today's guest, she has quite a few hyphenates. She is a journalist, an author, a content creator, an excellent dinner party hostess, a lover of slutty little sundresses, and the co-founder and CEO of the Financial Diet. Please welcome Chelsea Fagan.
Woo. Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our show. We're so excited.
Like truly excited. I didn't really know the extent of all of your work. I knew of the Financial Diet, but I'm now on this deep dive in this show. I'm such a fan. But before we dig in, is this slutty sundress part of your official bio, or did Fran just like throw that in? What's the backstory on that?
So I'm a big fan of what I call Diane Lane sundresses, because that is like a very big subgenre of movie, which is like she's just throwing on a slutty sundress and leaving a bad marriage and like going to get some 4D on a very luxurious trip. It's like Nancy Meyers movies plus sex. So that's just a vibe I'm always going for in summer.
Oh, well, and I love it. She has a whole series of slutty little sundress videos. And like, as soon as I saw them, I was like, this is very Fran coded. Because I love a wrap dress. Just you throw it on, it does all of the work for you.
Listen, I love a sundress too, and I'm very, very jealous of them because I still have to wear two pieces in the summer. Okay. So Chelsea, we have so much to talk about, but first up on top, I wanted to say you're kind of a perfect guest for our show because your whole career has evolved in interesting ways. You're kind of perpetually doing a Let Me Fix It and pivoting at every turn. I wanted to start with your journalism career, as Fran kind of alluded to. So you met Fran way back in 2013 when you interviewed her for the Thought Catalog. Is it just Thought Catalog, not the?
Just Thought Catalog, and it's still around.
It is.
Yeah, I know.
May she thrive. So you interviewed her for Thought Catalog, where you were a writer and editor. And class, just so you know, I keep saying the Thought Catalog was a staple of the mid-aughts.
Oh,
so Chelsea,
he is really trying to make this aughts thing. Chelsea,
what do you
please.
call the 2000s? What would you refer to them as, just the 2000s or the aughts?
Well, I would actually say it was technically a bigger thing I think it started in 2010. So I think it would have technically been in the
mid-aughts.
The mid-teens. So the 20-teens?
That sounds terrible, but I think that's technically what it would be.
20 teens does sound terrible.
20 teens. So
20 teens sounds like something illegal, right?
Right?
Like,
oh God, terrible. So back in the 20 teens, Thought Catalog was a staple with tons of listicles and personal essays with clicky, sometimes salacious headlines. Talk to us a little bit about working at Thought Catalog and what, if at all, how, if at all, it shaped your career as a writer.
Well, first of all, Fran, thank you for so graciously referring to it as journalism and your prompting, because I would not describe it that way. So, I started my writing career by submitting articles to Thought Catalog. The very first one I ever published there went viral. This was back in 2011. And
do you remember what it was?
I do. It was called Now Accepting Boyfriend Applications. It
Oh.
was like a list of criteria. I will still to this day receive disgruntled emails every now and again from men, because the first one was that the man can't be short, which I regret writing now at the ripe old age of 35. But it's funny too. It was published the day I met my husband.
Was it really?
Which is a very
now
auspicious
how tall
day.
and how tall is your husband?
He's 6'4", so he's not a short
Okay,
man.
girl. He was reading Thought Catalog, okay?
Closed mouths do not get fed. Chelsea said, you must read the stipulations, and if you do not, if it doesn't apply, let it fly.
100%. So I sort of manifested him. But I actually wrote and submitted articles for the first maybe 6 to 9 months of writing there for free. I was not being paid.
Wow.
Oh.
And then I negotiated my way up to $25 an article. And in that time, I
Wow.
mean, I had many articles go viral. So, you know, being on the other side of running a media business for a long time now, I can only imagine the finances of that. But then I became a staffer there in 2012. And my job for most of my career there was, you know, I had a goal, I think it was 25 million views a month.
Now, is that a personal goal or was that your actual page view goal from the site?
So that was the page view goal from the site, which was really high. So
Yeah.
I was often writing like 4 articles a day, you know, that I was just trying to get to go viral. And it would be, you know, it was Mad Libs. It was like what your ex says about Y type of thing.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it was in many ways, it was not a good job for a lot of reasons, but on the flip side, I think it was very, I mean, almost anything you could do professionally in media after would have probably been a step up financially and otherwise, but also because I was only making like $36,000 a year, but also I think it really gave me a very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Like a very not naive view into the actual reality of making a sustainable media business. And although I don't emulate a lot of things about it, learning about it in that way definitely prepared me to start my own eventually.
Well, listen, one of the things I love about you is how self-reflective you are and how
Yes.
aware you are. And yes, maybe some of the headlines at Catalog were a little salacious and clickbaity. And I worked at Upworthy for a few years, so I know all about that clickbait cringe. Something about odd numbers and headlines. I don't know
Yes.
why that tends to do well. I pulled some Chelsea headlines: 9 Halloween candies and what they would be like as boyfriends.
Oh, God.
7 people on social media who are more annoying than new moms. I don't know what it is. The odd numbers, they get the girls going. So aside from graduating from the dreaded listicle, you've really been candid about how your perspective has changed on certain subjects that you've written about in the past. Most notably, you made a TikTok addressing a piece that you wrote 12 years ago about street harassment, and that video's racked up nearly 500,000 views. Can you talk to us about what inspired you to make that video?
Well, it's 13 years ago now. We inch ever closer to 2 decades worth of distance from it. But again, you've put it nicely. So in 2011, I wrote an article. Basically, it was when the slut walks were happening, and it was, you know, I quoted like male stand-up comedians, and you know, it was very essentially the thesis was like, if you wear revealing clothes, don't be surprised if you get harassed or assaulted, which is, you know, a horrendous point of view to take for sure, even for a 22-year-old. But it was also, you know, very reflective of not just, I mean, the reason the slut walk came to be in the first place was because that was a pretty dominant school of thought, but also, you know, I think, and of course it can't be understated that there was a really substantial pressure on the website to generate clicks, often through controversy and starting discourse. But it was terrible. And I think, you know, part of the reason that I made the video now is because I do still get comments about it. And I think, you know, for me, I really always want to push back against this. You know, I think cancel culture is a not a really accurate term for it. But I do think there is a subset, there can be a faction of people who, you know, want to hold people to account on the internet for things they might have said or done, but they don't actually really want to see them change or evolve or learn. And for me, I think, you know, whether or not you choose to follow me or support my work 13 years later is completely your choice. And I always say that, you know, if you still feel angry at me now for that, that's your right. I mean, I did write an apology a year after that happened. And of course, 13 years later, don't identify with it at all. But I think when I get comments that are spiteful, that are, oh, just so you know, this is what happened, I always want to, if possible, use myself as an example of like, I'm not going to shy away from it. I really did think those things. But I also, like most of us, grew up in an extremely misogynist culture. I internalized a lot of horrible views about women, about gender relations, about all aspects of this sort of part of our lives. And that article, combined with a few other factors, was an accurate representation of that view. And I am someone now who not only is a very different person, lives a very different life, but feels totally differently about it. But I also am not going to live in shame of it. Same way I wouldn't live in shame about something I did to a boyfriend 12, 13 years ago. You know, I did some shitty things in all areas of my life, and I don't walk around feeling not only shame about it, but I also don't walk around identifying with it. And I think for me, I really think there needs to be more examples on the internet of people. I mean, because I was really, I mean, we didn't call it that, but I was canceled, you know, like I was, people were really angry at me very loudly and publicly so, and rightfully so. And my response to that was not to double down or to become more that person. And I think if we don't leave the door open for people to learn and to become different people, not only is that likely to result in, you know, more people moving away from progressive values, but it's also, it eventually comes for us all, because I don't think there's one person in the world who's never said or done anything they don't regret.
Oh yeah. And to that point, I think, especially speaking as somebody who, you know, has had a long career where I've talked about people's mistakes and I've made mistakes too, I think people delight in finding the fuck up. If you are somebody who is quote unquote progressive or liberal, they're like, oh yeah, well, you've said X, Y, and Z. Like people love receipts for that reason, which is why I really appreciated that you were like, I'm going to address it head on. Yeah, I said it. I don't think that way anymore. And I think that that's what's so refreshing about that approach is most people don't do that.
Well, and the thing I love about it too, Chelsea, is that you really do, in the vulnerability that you offer, it allows us all to be just a little bit more human. And people cannot fault you when you're vulnerable and when you're honest, right? We just did an apologies episode where we talk about apologies a lot, and we dissect people's apologies and whether they worked and why they didn't. And I think this is just such a great example and a master class of what an apology is. You said, yeah, I did it and I've grown. Now what are we going to do? Right. And I think that's all you can do in those instances. And you really do it well. You name the thing, you add a context around it, which is just so huge. But more importantly, you also acknowledge that what you're offering might not be enough for other people, and they have to decide for themselves whether you've grown or not. How did you come to that realization, and how the heck do we help other people who screw up publicly kind of find that space to be that vulnerable and offer the same kind of example?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people in the public eye, I mean, this is a different but perhaps more recent example in my own life. You know, a month or two ago, some person that I went out with once, like 11 years ago, made a video on TikTok about their experience with me. That was, I guess I acted in a very cringe way. And it was, you know, the video, you know, it called me ugly. It wasn't very nice, but,
okay, they talk about you being cringe, but then they're also gonna call you ugly.
Right.
Like, have you seen the hair? Have you seen the glasses? Have you seen like Chelsea's serving looks when she's not in a slutty sundress? She's in a cowl neck sweater with a thread count you can only dream of. What are you talking about?
That's very, very sweet and very flattering. But it was a really interesting thing because, you know, the video I was blocked from all platforms before it was posted, so I couldn't see it myself. I couldn't respond to it or anything.
Wow.
And the story was told in a way that made it seem as if it were very recent. But it was obviously more than a decade ago. And I think, you know, for me in seeing that and you know, it blew up. So basically everyone I know in my life has seen it. A lot of people have brought it up to me. You know, on the one hand, having been used to, you know, dealing with moments from my past that don't reflect well on me or having to acknowledge that part of my life, I did feel somewhat prepared and grounded. But on the other hand, like this is the first time I've ever spoken about it. I didn't like, you know, make a response or go tit for tat because I mean, ultimately I think, you know, although for a week my comments were just flooded with people being like, oh, she got your ass, whatever. You know, I never responded to it because I think, I mean, I think we have to have a higher bar for what we respond to. Like, I'm not going to go tit for tat about like, oh yeah, we didn't vibe once 11 years ago and, never saw each other
But
again.
also like
Right.
but also, that person's experience is their experience, but you've sat on this for 11 years. There was a time where they could have reached out to you to say, "Hey, I don't feel good about how this was handled," but obviously they're taking it to TikTok and blocked you so that they can get some sort of response, whether it be from the audience and not necessarily you. I think you're correct in to say it's not worth putting your energy into it because they got what they wanted out of it. If they
Right.
wanted a reconciliation with you, they would have talked to you.
100%. And I also think, well, and also it was an unflattering story about me and that I sounded insecure and cringy, but it wasn't like I did something bad or malicious in the story. So I think that's also, an important part of the litmus test. But I say that to say, in the moment for like a week, I felt very distressed, because, it's embarrassing, first of all. And I think that's part of the goal, but also, and this is why I think so many people have really bad reactions to things like this, is because there is, I think, a very natural human desire to defend yourself, to advocate
Yeah.
for yourself, to not betray yourself in a lot of ways. And I think for a lot of people, admitting that they were wrong, that they messed up, that they did something bad or embarrassing or inconsiderate feels like in some ways a betrayal of their former selves. And I think
Yeah.
about, there was a woman who went viral on TikTok this week for an experience she had in a lesbian bar in New York.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, they have been eating her ass alive on that platform.
Delon, the cliff notes is a straight girl went to a lesbian bar and had a straight man with her. I know. And it's one of those things where like it starts off like a bad joke. A straight woman in a lesbian
Right,
bar with a
right.
straight guy and had an encounter with a lesbian in the bar who essentially said to her straight male friend, like, what are you doing here? Like who are you with? And this straight woman made this video saying like, oh, so we're not allowed to go to lesbian bars. And to Chelsea's point, it's become the trending topic of the timeline. Everyone is having valid critiques of her, but just saying the same thing over and over and over again. Like everybody is just weighing in to say, you're not supposed to be there. And she knows she's not supposed to be there. So part of me is kind of like, did she make this video because she has a genuine misunderstanding of what the critique is? And or does she know that it has all of the buzzwords that are going
Right.
to make it go viral, which is exactly what happened.
Well, and someone did also make I'm sorry.
No, please
go ahead.
No, someone did make a response essentially telling a different version of the story she told as the woman
Yes.
she was talking about, which made her look maybe not so truthful in the way that she represented it. But it's interesting. I've been watching her profile since she posted that. And, it's either she hasn't addressed it or has kind of doubled down. And I think from my perspective, watching it, like I feel strongly that if I were in her position, that I would totally mea culpa, make a video being like, that was cringe as fuck. I'm so sorry I did that. I really did not understand the, whatever. And I think for the most part, although the internet can be swift in its, recrimination, I think it can also be people delight in some capacity to see someone have that level of self-awareness and the ability to admit to a mistake and that humility. But I do think that in the moment I can totally understand from her perspective. I also picture her friends around her. I also picture the conversations that she's having privately, and I understand how in the moment, with your defensiveness and your cortisol spiked through the roof, it can feel damn near impossible to do anything that makes it look like you are, again, betraying your former self or walking, because you feel like you're your only ally. So to then throw yourself under the bus in a way, I think it goes against people's human nature, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting about that whole story.
That's true.
Sorry, what's interesting
Dawn.
about that whole story to me is that she went to this bar, had an experience, and then went to the internet and talked about it. So she kind of put herself on Front Street and then got backlash because of it. So I think
She did.
she put herself in the situation, but I do really appreciate what you said about like having a perspective about what she would have done, what she did wrong, right? I mean, as a very gay person that goes to gay bars, I'm like, yeah, those aren't really spaces. Like, we don't want to see your bridal party come in to a gay bar for the drag show, but at the same time, like, it's a public space where everyone's allowed to. So like, what's the discourse we can have around that very public space that some people hold sacred, right?
Yeah, and I think this is all kind of related to my next question, the last one on this topic. Chelsea, you mentioned being 22 when you were working at Thought Catalog, and when you wrote that article, and this idea that no one is born with good politics. Full disclosure, I had terrible opinions in my 20s that thankfully never ended up online. But your point reminded me of a tweet that I saw last year about Issa Rae expressing regret over writing a memoir in her 20s.
Mm.
And this journalist was saying that when he was talking to her, she said that if she could go back, she would not share all of those things. And he felt similarly about all these deeply personal essays that young writers write. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about the responsibilities that a place like a Thought Catalog or BuzzFeed, or I think of like Exo Jane, which like some of the stories that I would see on that website, like I left a tampon in for 3 months, and I'm like, girl, why are you writing an article about this? But also, like, why is a news or a platform capitalizing on this and essentially throwing them to the wolves? I'm just curious if you have thoughts about, like, should media companies be more mindful? Like, should there be an age limit? Should we be like asking some core questions before we say, yes, go write that personal essay that will go viral, but could potentially screw up your entire life?
I think it's a nuanced issue that, it's funny. I always think that, like, although I posted some terrible stuff on Thought Catalog, no doubt. I was lucky that I met my now husband basically the day I started writing publicly, and have been with him since. And he is a 100% offline person. So, that whole part of my personal life, like if I was going through breakups while writing at Thought Catalog, like I can only imagine the shit I would have posted, with access to a public platform. So like, by pure chance really, and I have many friends who have shared stuff about their relationships that they regret in really heightened emotional moments. So
I had a whole podcast with my ex-husband, and I was like, delete.
Wait a minute. Wait
I was
a
like,
minute.
hey Brick, can you delete all of these videos?
I wasn't gonna say it.
No, I'll say it.
She'll say it gladly.
Listen, and sorry to cut you off. I don't regret anything that I said on that podcast, but it's the feeling of, oh my God, that is another time in my life.
Yes.
And I don't want to think about that time in my life. And I'm a different person now. And I just want to be this person and not that person.
100%. But I also think that what those things are different for everyone. And
Yes.
It is really impossible to know from the outside what someone will regret sharing or what will later change for them. I mean, for me, I've obviously gone whole hog on financial transparency. Basically every aspect of my finances is either out there, or like I've had, when news outlets have written things, like they have audited our finances as a business. Like I do have that level, like I can't walk that back. But there may be other things that I will eventually regret having shared so candidly, and I don't even necessarily know what they are right now. So I think there's that aspect of it. Also, similarly, I've interviewed probably over 100 people easily by now for my show. And, we will generally give people, if you want to cut something, if you want to, not say something, we always give people that offer. But, we have a comment section on YouTube that is, pretty discerning, I would say. And, they loved, for example, they loved your interview. We still hear about it all the time. The comments are glowing. We've had other guests where the comments are very negative about the person. And we've had on occasion people write to us very angrily about having posted it. And in some cases, we were already giving them a very sympathetic edit. But, I think there are certain things, like if a person is not very, if they're tone deaf about their financial privilege, if they're not honest about certain things, if they're speaking in a way that's like very inconsiderate, like about other socioeconomic groups, like things like that will always kind of set the audience off, or speaking from a place of expertise they don't have, whatever it may be. And, in some cases we can delete, in other cases because of ad agreements, we can't necessarily take the post down, at least not right away. And I think in those moments, like, if you had asked me this prior to having gone through that as a media business person, as an owner, I would probably have said, like, yes, we need to hold a lot more accountability. But on the flip side, I think it's not always a totally clear thing on either end what are going to be the things you really regret. And some people, to your point about the tampon thing, like, I remember stories like that all the time. And sometimes like those stories, those very harrowing personal stories or superficially embarrassing personal stories can be things that people are most proud of sharing because they really helped people or they helped themselves or they held them accountable in some way. So there's no one set of rules that I think works for each instance.
Yeah.
I think one of the hardest things too is like when we live in an age where your person is your content, right? When your experience, your story is your content. To your point, Chelsea, it's hard to gauge that, but you also want to share it, right? We're not only sharing family stories and things on Instagram, but both you and Fran are really transparent about your experience in life, and the timeline is just the timeline, right? And I feel
Yeah.
Fred has talked about this so many times about like, why don't you go back through your Twitter timeline and delete some of that stuff? Why are they finding your racist tweets still? But I mean, like
Yeah.
at the same point, like we should know that stuff, but like, it's just you were a different person at that point. This brings us to kind of the big kahuna, the financial diet, as I said at the top. So in 2014, you started the financial diet as a personal blog about your finances, but in the years since, you've grown it to like this full-blown media company with over 1 million followers on YouTube, 2 books, which we'll talk about in a second. You have a thriving Patreon, and I believe Too Good to Be True is the podcast for the financial diet. You have a whole series of in-person workshops and events dedicated to giving young women space to talk about their finances. So talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to create the financial diet and how you went from a personal blog to a whole company with a Manhattan office and 8 employees, because I know that wasn't easy.
Yeah.
No. So I started it initially to hold myself accountable financially because I had a really, really unhealthy relationship with money at the time. It'll be 10 years ago this year. And I started it as a personal blog. My co-founder and partner, I have 2 other partners now, but the first partner, my co-founder, who was working at an ad agency, reached out to me on day 3. She wanted to help me design it, use it for her portfolio. Then John and Hank Green of, the internet came out very shortly thereafter. They gave us a small grant, and then they came back to us a little under a year later asking if we wanted to become one of their YouTube channels. So although in some ways, like we've never had investors, we've never, had any kind of outside of that one grant we received, we've never had any kind of institutional help in that regard. We've always been independently owned and operated and funded. We've also had a lot of advantages. I mean, both my co-founder and I, we were able to go without earning a salary for almost 2 years because our partners were able to stay on their insurance. I mean, I still worked freelance and stuff, but I didn't have my full-time income. But both of our partners worked. My co-founder lived with her parents for a while. I, took on other odd jobs and things like that. And so we did have a lot of advantages that allowed us to start the company. So although it was difficult, it was definitely easier and more privileged than many.
And
Yeah,
sorry to like throw cookies on you, but you are our guest, so I have to just cut in and say, like, this is why I fucks with you, Chelsea.
Yo.
This is why I like you.
This
is why I like you.
I'm feeling the same thing though.
You know what I mean? You're like, thank you, but also, and we talk about this a lot because we talk a lot about brands and like their journeys, mostly failed brands, and the fact of the matter that many businesses start from people that already had money or already had successful businesses, or were able to get investments from their family members or whatnot. And so it's the prevailing theme of a lot of stories, and people don't talk about it.
Yes.
And it is a privilege to say, I have a partner who has a job and I can stay on their insurance. And like just acknowledging that is really honest, but also gives other people, it like lifts the weight off of other people's shoulders that are going, why didn't I start a company 10 years ago? Well, you're in a different situation, and that's okay.
1,000%. I also, to be fair, I mean, I do operate in a very high level of financial transparency, in part for not selfish reasons, but self-preservationist reasons, because, as a business owner of 10 years, we ultimately we've had really great luck. We've had always a really great team, great relationships with the people we've worked with, we've collaborated with. We've gotten really lucky in a lot of ways with how we've operated, but I also know that not only as a business owner, but as someone who puts myself out there value-wise in terms of what I pay myself, in terms of our company's values, in terms of my political values, like I need to be very accountable to, like, I could publish my company's entire financial history on the internet and like that would line up with what I've said. And I feel like that provides me a level of mental relief, because to the earlier point about like, you know, things that I've done in my past, I mean, I'm sure I've met people that didn't like me, that I've said or done cringe or embarrassing or bad things in my life, for sure. No one's perfect, but to know that I have that level of that no one can say anything about me financially. That is a really important thing, because my business is in finance and because that's so much of what I talk about. It's just really important to be transparent, because I would not be comfortable with I mean, obviously I wouldn't be comfortable with lying or misrepresenting myself, but also B, if I'm not upfront about all of the aspects of my finances, it leaves the door open for someone else to say, well, what about this? What about this?
Yeah.
And it maybe is like a sort of paranoid thing, but I think you know very well, obviously, like
I was about to say, I have that same feeling.
And people will, and like, I'm very, I mean, I have to be self-aware of the fact that like, I am a very privileged, you know, white American English speaking upper middle class woman who lives in Manhattan with her husband and dog. Like, I am a very, very privileged person who, if I don't come up front about all of those privileges, like someone else will, and they'll be right to do it. So I do want to always acknowledge that being really transparent about my finances does benefit me in that way, because it does take that card off the table, which I especially am conscientious about as a business owner, because I don't want someone to denigrate my business as a result of denigrating me.
Well, I really appreciate the humility around you being transparent. You're very humble about being transparent, and I'm like, but for us, I think what we're repeatedly saying, what I'm repeatedly feeling in this interview is like, transparency is that novel. Why is it
so rare?
novel?
No one does it.
You know what I mean? And so like, I'm sure it's your everyday life, but like, it's so cool to witness it, because again, like I said at the top when we were talking about another topic, like people, when we were talking about your apology, people can't fault you for that. And it sounds like that's...
Oh, they do. Oh, trust me. There are
She's like, I have the receipts to show it.
In my comments. Still so many.
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, to your earlier point, they're allowed to be angry.
Yes.
And I guess, and I'm curious if this is something that, again, you've come to over time, but I know when I was in my 20s and even, you know, into my 30s, it was hard to see people say mean things about me on the internet. And it was hard to know that people didn't like me. And I struggle sometimes, you know, there are certain people who are universally liked, and unfortunately the tides turn on them at some point. But I still feel like a little bit of jealousy when I'm like, God, everybody likes this bitch. I don't see one nasty person in these comments. And I'm not going to be the person, but I'm like, wow, what must that feel like? I've never had a moment like that on the internet.
I totally get you. One of my friends has a pretty large internet following and is like universally beloved in a way that I'll never know or relate to. And I'm just like, what does it feel like to be God's favorite? But I also think in some ways, you know, it's funny when I was going through, when I had, because, you know, that experience I had recently on social media with someone dredging up this rather odd story about me was the first time something like that had really ever happened in some ways. Usually people, if they've called me out, it's been for like some garbage thing I wrote, which I'm like, saw that coming. But this one, it's like, really, of all things. So, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine about it, you know, asking for advice somewhat. And she was like, babe, I hate to break this to you, but like literally everyone with over 1 million TikTok followers has their own dedicated hate subreddit. So like, yes, buckle up, girl. Like if the more profile you get. And I think that's also part of the reason why, you know, over the years, some opportunities have come to TFD or to myself more in the financial space, but that would mean a substantially greater platform. And I think for me, there's always been a real reluctance to making any kind of big jump, because I think there is a point at which visibility has extremely diminishing returns. You know,
say that louder for the kids in the back.
Truly, but like I think there's a really good level of visible to be to benefit, for example, creative projects, personal, your own finances, all of that. But once you tip past a certain point, it's all downhill, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the other thing I hear both of you saying that I want to pull on is like, there's so much bad stuff that is said about people on the internet, but knowing more Fran's work, and becoming a fan of yours now, Chelsea, there's so much good said about the two of you. And like, you both have such ad value that it's I think very human to lob on to the thing that's said and like to have it
Oh,
be
yeah.
personal, right? One of the things that I think that you offer in the financial diet, in your YouTube content in particular, is like a social psychology about the systems and the way the financial systems affect us. And it's not just about like balancing your budget or your taxes. It's like you're talking about how money affects our person and our lives, which I really respect and appreciate. One of the videos of yours that I really loved was How the Wealthy Gaslight America. First of all, you also have whoever's doing the headlines for your videos. Brilliant.
I think it's
Brilliant.
Chelsea.
Is it
I
really?
did that one. I don't do all of them, but I did do that one.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.
But How the Wealthy Gaslight America, you talk about wealth envy. And I don't know why that feels like novel to me, like I'd never heard it before. But talk to us a little bit about wealth envy. And do you think it's the fault of media? You label a lot of like different TV shows and news stories in the video talking about wealth envy. And I don't know if it's specifically the media or if it's just capitalism in general, but do you have a fix for it as well?
Okay. So as far as wealth envy, I think probably the biggest single issue today has to be social media beyond even because I think seeing wealthy people in movies and television is nothing new. And I think that that's always been the case, but to be constantly like in friction with so many lifestyles that are so different from yours, but often so manipulatively represented or so poorly disclosed, is really bad for mental health. I mean, it's really, really bad for even just like spatial awareness. And I always sort of think to myself, like, there's this like 22-year-old, like very gorgeous Mormon lifestyle model girl.
They're always Mormon.
She's like on my feed all the time. She has a bunch of kids. She's like also married to a model. Like what is her name? I can't remember. She's like making.
I think her name is Sophia. Her name is Sophia, I think. And she has that beautiful big kitchen. Or I mean, there's dozens
that's
of
another
them.
Mormon. That's the other Mormon.
That's another Mormon.
I guess there's just a lot of them.
Do her children dress exclusively in beige? Because that will help me narrow down. Okay, well then it's not the one I'm thinking of.
No. Although there's been a lot of really interesting articles about why Mormons are so prevalent in lifestyle blogging, and there's a really interesting rabbit hole to go down on that. And a lot of it is. I think
I read that it was like it's like a recruiting tool that they're doing it to try and get membership.
100%.
Am I making? Yeah.
Yes. So a lot of them, interestingly, are either very directly funded or sort of implicitly supported by the LDS Church. And often, like when you see actual LDS literature and, talking points in the video or in the content, that can often be a sign. But suffice to say, there's also a lot of reasons why the religion, the doctrine of Mormonism dovetails really nicely with blogging and creating and things like that. There's interesting articles to go to. But there's so much to be said about this person who's like obviously fabulously wealthy and extremely young and like living this, like she's always like basically in ball gowns, making chocolate chip cookies and like living in this
and making bread from scratch.
Making like literally everything from scratch, things I didn't even know you could make from scratch. But suffice to say, like I was like getting deep into the lore for a minute of like watching people's videos, like in the discourse about her. And then I felt this feeling of like, in what other universe would I be sitting here at my age of 35 years old, living in New York City, no children, having this life that I live, watching a 22-year-old mom of 3 or whatever in a palace in Utah making scones and like watching people talk about her and like getting so deep into the literature. And it's like, that would never, ever, ever happen. But in some ways there's and I think there can be really beautiful aspects of the flattening of social media in terms of like, getting to follow people who are older than you, who live different lives than you do, who have different things to say, who have different perspectives. That can be beautiful, but it can also be very damaging because in this particular space, I exist in the same plane of existence as this woman, but obviously on no psychological or social level would we ever normally share a space, and I should not be that informed about her life. So I really
Yes.
think that
Well
health
said.
envy is in large part today driven by that proximity, and also again that lack of disclosure. I think people really don't understand the extent to which anyone who has, almost as a rule, anyone on social media who lives a very glamorous lifestyle got that lifestyle from something other than social media.
Oh yeah, most of them were rich to begin with.
100%. And I don't think people really take that into account enough. And so I think the fix for me, on a very individual level, it doesn't scale necessarily because social media is always working against this algorithmically, but is to try to only pare down your exposure to either things that have actual meaning for you, like people you know, subjects you're interested in, or things that feel additive to your perspective in a way that's beneficial. And for me, that can be a hard thing to sense, but a good litmus test is, how do I feel after I scroll away from that content? You know?
Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, that is so real. And I do feel like TikTok has become a place for really rich people to flex what they have. And it does feel different because, I think I've heard people using like quiet luxury, so to speak, where you knew certain people were rich, but like I didn't get to see your closet. So I didn't know how rich you were. Like I didn't know what your garage looked like and how many cars you had, for example. And now that's like a whole genre, like closet tours and, get ready to buy a new car with me. Like it just stuff that, again, I'd never been exposed to. And you realize, oh, damn, like rich people are living on a totally different planet.
Well, and
than
this
the
is
rest of
like
us.
gives like the late stage capitalism theory like so much fodder, right? Like the idea that we're criticizing the rich and criticizing capitalism and the hypocrisy of capitalism because we're sitting there watching it, and it's never like to the 2D part of it. It's never can be realized. I'm never going to be that rich. I mean, if anybody's listening, I would love to be. You know what I mean? If anybody's listening, but like it just feels like so elusive. Yet we're striving for it, right? That's kind of like we're on the hamster wheel, as it were.
I totally agree, and also I think there's something to be said for, I mean, talking about the quote unquote quiet luxury. I mean, first of all, let's be very clear. Anyone who's like discreet wealthy is not on social media. Let's start there. Like it's not. So we're already
the fact that there are tutorials on how to look quiet, to appear quiet luxury.
Doing
it's like
the most.
No,
the most.
The absolute most, but also I think there's a very fine line between, and this is something I did an interview recently with a creator that I really like, who said that, there's often a really fine line between it's hard to tell the difference between being inspired by something and being envious of something. That can feel very similar. And also social media really inculcates this feeling that because you enjoy or appreciate something, you must acquire it, that it must be something that you can purchase. Or, I mean, listen, basically every app now is turning into a shopping app in terms of you see something, you can have it, you can own it. And I think especially, one thing that I did for my own social media sort of purging is I love interior decor stuff, but I try to be very conscientious and mindful of, I follow, actual interior designers who are showing their projects that they work on, who are professionals paid for it, or magazines like an Architectural Digest. But for a lot of the individual people, creators, influencers, who they're essentially always showing their own home, there's a very inherently deceptive element of it, which is they're presenting this as this is my life, but it really is their job. And so much of what you're looking at was given to them for free. They were paid,
and they don't disclose.
And they don't disclose it.
They don't disclose, and they tell you to go to that link in their bio, and they don't even disclose that they're getting commissions. I mean,
100%. And there's a woman I have connected with on social media who I really like. She's a very nice person, but I almost I want to say girl, I have to mute you for my own sanity. And I don't want you to take it personally that I never like or watch any of your stuff, but you live in, this incredibly glamorous space that's constantly being renovated to within an inch of its life. And I know a lot of that stuff is comped, and it's not my business to get on you about it, but I just can't be seeing that. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to do that. And I think again, the prevailing theme here is the transparency outwardly, but then transparency with your internal self to say, how is this making me feel? And I have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are not willing to do that. And you know, I quit Twitter last year for that reason because I was like, this is making me feel bad. And I have to
Same.
be honest with myself. Like, I'm feeling bad every day. I'm getting behind on paid things. Someone is paying me to do something, and I am wasting my time on this app. And I think more people need to have that level of transparency, again, outwardly, but inwardly as well. On that same topic, a few months ago, you had a viral TikTok where you shared that despite being a co founder of the Financial Diet, you are not the highest paid person in the company. You ranked yourself fifth on the list of salaries. You did also say that you feel obnoxious talking about it, but I'm going to give you cookies here and say we've had such a large trend of CEOs showing how out of touch they are, whether it be Elon Musk or Bob Iger during the writer's strike. Your transparency is really impressive. Why are you not the number one spot at your company? Because I think most people, when they like say I'm starting a company, you know, I'm trying to be rich. I want to be, you know, raking in the dollars. And who is at the number one spot if it's not you?
Sales team.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
I
but
mean,
that's industry standard.
without even thinking about it, you knew. I mean, but that just tells you why you're the boss and I'm not. 'Cause I don't know that I would know.
Well, they're responsible for generating the vast majority of the revenue. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's also industry standard. Like, if you point to any media company outside of executives, generally speaking, the sales team are going to be making far and away more money than almost anyone else because, again, they produce almost all of the not all, but like a lot of the revenue. Because most of our business is still ad sales, so someone's got to sell those ads, and it's certainly not a job I would want to do. So, God love them.
Heard.
But no, I mean, I think what's very important to stress here is that I not only do I have a lot of income outside of TFD, I had a romance novel I published last year that, you know, has been a great source of income for me. I have another book project that I sold recently. I have, you know, I do other consulting occasionally. We only have a 40 work week at my company. So I do have a lot of extra time. I don't want kids, so I have a lot of time. But also I live in a dual income, no kid household. My husband works in tech. He earns a very good living. My mortgage is $2,400 a month. I have a 2.85%, interest rate. We have no car. We have no big hobbies. Like we don't like at this point, earning more money from TFD specifically would do nothing to improve my life and would put way more pressure on the company because every additional dollar that someone earns inherently is a dollar you have to make. So for me, it is very easy. Like I've been making the same amount. I actually didn't take a salary for several months last year because we were dealing with some financial difficulties. But now I'm back to being paid. And I've made $90,000 a year for the past like 5 years, give or take a few. I'll occasionally do like bonus-based projects on certain things, but for the most part, it's remained the same. And I've grown my income outside of it. But even then, I've also capped that out in a lot of ways, and I don't always earn income outside of it. But it's very clearly like one thing that is so important to focus on financially is what is enough. You know, because if you don't have a very, very strong sense of enough,
Put that on a magnet.
Look, my eyebrows
What
went
is
straight
enough?
up to my hairline.
What?
Okay.
Come on. That like, I mean, that is very, it's just, it's so simple, but it's so real. What
Yeah.
is enough? I think about that with billionaires. I'm like, you can't even enjoy all of the money you have in your bank account.
And you're so
When
worried
will you
about
have
losing
enough?
it that like you're stressed.
1,000%. And I think for me, that point was reached some time ago. There's nothing, I genuinely feel that there's nothing in my life that I want that I can't have or that I can't do. Now, granted, I mean, if I had aspirations to own 5 houses and have a private jet and all this other wasteful shit, like, sure, I couldn't afford to do that. But it is also one thing that is really important financially beyond the concept of having enough so that you're not constantly, you know, striving for something financially that's often out of your control is if you don't have a very strong sense of enough and a very rooted sense of what actually has value for you and makes you happy, you will almost without fail become a victim of lifestyle inflation. And we read all the time about couples in New York City. They earn $500,000 a year. They're living paycheck to paycheck because they got the private school, they got the country home, they got the 2-car garage, they got, I mean, it never ends. And especially because most people tend to socialize with their wealth group. And as they go up the ladder, that becomes more and more concentrated.
You're trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Okay.
100%.
The Joneses keep coming up on this podcast.
Sure
I ain't
do.
seen them motherfuckers, but everyone's trying to keep up.
Well, to that point, like if you don't keep that really grounded sense of enough, it will just continue to inflate. And there's no one I feel worse for. And I mean, okay, they'll yell at me for saying that. I obviously feel worse for people who don't have enough financially. Let me be clear. Right. But I also feel bad for, and I've made TikToks about this and sometimes deleted them because people will nitpick about this, but I really feel a sense of not empathy maybe, but pity for people who have a lot and spend a lot, because not only are they often locked into jobs and work situations that they don't want to be, but more importantly, they have robbed themselves of the one most important thing that money is supposed to give you, which is freedom.
Freedom.
And so to see people all the time, like, you know, in the social media content you were describing earlier, who maybe they're making a lot, but they're spending up to the maximum, like that's the real tragedy.
Yeah.
I really respect what you talk about in your video about my selfish choice to pay myself less, or it was an article, excuse me, that you had on LinkedIn. When you talk about you wanted a 4-day work week and 6 weeks PTO for everyone in your office, I want to know how you came to that strategy, but also like everybody wants a 4-day work week. It's like to the freedom part of it. You wanted money to give you something that wasn't just stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And it's being on that hamster wheel of capitalism again. How did you come to that? And how did you work toward it?
So I actually didn't lead that project. My colleague at the time, she since a couple of years later left us to work for a job that I know makes more sense for her, but we miss her every day. No, and her replacement is wonderful too. They're all great ladies. But she actually spearheaded the project. She was our financial and operations manager, and she's very much on like the cutting edge of, you know, labor practices and what people are doing and trying experiments. So she took a survey of our staff, which is small, but it's still worth surveying. And she was like, you know, we'd always done summer Fridays. There's nothing unique about summer. We could try it. And why not just do no Friday instead of stopping at noon? We'll just try it for 6 months. We'll do a little experiment. We'll look at the data, and if we like it, we'll keep going. And so she led that project. She actually wrote a few articles about it for our LinkedIn, because she did, you know, follow-ups, I think at the 6, 12, and 18-month point, just kind of analyzing all of the different aspects of the business. And it became very clear. I mean, we have the data that most people who work office jobs, they don't even work close to 40 hours a week, even if they're technically
They're on TikTok. Caption your videos, kids.
2 hours a day I was on Facebook when I had an office job. Okay, 2 hours of the 8, I promise you.
So to that point, we were like, let's give that time back. And I think especially, you know, I don't have children, but several of our team do. And, you know, it's not, I think we often forget just how much time reverberates throughout people's lives. I mean, in terms of childcare costs, in terms of other projects you can take on, in terms of, you know, just the ability to have a day. The 3-day weekend to me is perfect. You have 1 day for relaxation, 1 day for socialization, and 1 day for all of your domestic stuff. You know, like you can clean the house and do the laundry and go to appointments. And I think, you know, what's really interesting is that, so transparently, we don't pay as much, I mean, as some other companies do, especially for some of our more tenured employees, you know, and we have this conversation all the time. Like, everyone's paid well. I think no one's paid any less than like $75,000, $80,000 a year full time, but at the 32 hours a week. But especially for more senior employees, you know, they might be making 110, 115, but they could go to another company and make 130, 140. And we have that conversation very transparently all the time, because again, most of our employees have been here for a very, very long time. And we can only afford to go up so much each year, even with people.
But it's the trade-off, right? It's like you can make more money, but then if you can't enjoy that money, then is it, to your point, is it enough, right?
100%.
Like
Yeah. And also in the case of some of the mothers on the team, for example, they've said, you know, I do the math, and not having that extra day of daycare or of nanny or childcare or whatever, like that would actually cancel out like up to X many hours of
Right.
work that I would be working anyway. So, it is just really interesting to see how much of a compensation perk that actually plays as well for people.
It's so human
Yeah.
focused too, and I just don't think we talk about that in our systems enough, which I
No.
really respect and appreciate. Okay, so before we move on to the next topic, Chelsea, we love a game here on Let Me Fix It. So, as our first and only CEO that we've ever had on the pod, we want to play a game called Ask a CEO, where we ask you a variety of questions and get the unique and nuanced perspective of a real CEO. So, the first question, since the term girl boss is out, which I also have to ask you how y'all feel about the term girl boss. I mean, can't you just be a boss? Why has it got to be a girl boss?
Yeah,
But,
it's pretty cringy.
right. So since the term girl boss is out, if you had to self-identify with a totally unnecessary portmanteau, would you choose CEO or CEO?
And why?
CEO.
You have
And
to
why,
you
yes.
have to specify why.
CEO for sure.
Okay, girl.
Because we almost literally never work with men. I think almost literally, like all our staff's women. I think our lawyer's a man, but I mean he's a 1099, whatever. We're a client, so that's a different story. But suffice to say, we almost never interact with men. And when we do, you can always tell that they're so not used to being in a space that's entirely women. So I think having to make them refer to me as a hoe would just be a wonderful level of discomfort, and I would get a lot of joy out of that.
I love that.
That is a perfect answer. Okay, so next question. There is a theory called height premium that suggests that people that are taller are more likely to be respected and seen as authority figures. And as weird as that sounds, the Journal of Applied Psychology backs this theory up, stating that height is often linked with positive attributes and leader. As weird as that sounds, the Journal of Applied Psychology backs this theory up, stating that height is often linked with positive attributes like leadership and intelligence. So, my question is, Chelsea, how tall are you? And when it comes to being the boss, does size really matter?
I claim 5'7". I think.
What does claim 5'7" mean?
I'm like
5'6" and a half.
5'6", and I'm like 5'6" and 2/3. But
There's about to be a TikTok video. I've seen Chelsea in these streets,
Yeah.
and she's actually 5'5" and a half.
And also I just feel tall. Like I love a tall woman. I really identify with a tall woman. And actually the head of our sales team, she is like almost 6 feet. She's a tall lady. We have some tall ladies on our team. But no, I think it's funny. I think for me, I know this was a joke question, but I'm gonna just seriously say that I feel like because in society and like hetero dating particularly, we put so much emphasis on women being like teeny petite
Dainty.
little creatures.
Mhm.
I feel like so many tall women hate that about themselves, and they're like crunch themselves up. They'll wear ballet flats to formal events and shit. Like I'm
convinced that's why I have bad posture. It's because when I was
Ooh.
younger, I hated being tall. I was always trying to make myself smaller.
Wow.
So I love a tall girl, and we have a lot of tall queens on our team.
I
I love my short queens too, but
there was some a friend I was talking to who was like, whenever I see like a short girl with a tall man, was this you, Fran? A short girl
No.
with a tall man, I'm like, you really, girl? You had to take that one you had to take that. Why can't the tall girls have the tall men?
I mean, I've had times where, I'm currently in remission from dating men. But when I was still talking to them, I had a few times that I went on dates with guys where they seemed indignant over the fact that I was tall. They were like,
Yes.
I thought they thought I was lying on my dating profile. They're like,
Wow.
oh, you really are 5'10". And I was like, yes. How tall are you? Because they're realizing, oh shit, like
'Cause
I
they were
kind of
lying.
fudged. They
Yes.
fudge their height, and then they see me, and they're like, "Oh, wait a second!" Like,
That is so funny.
I actually stole this anecdote from one of my colleagues for my novel because my protagonist is a tall queen. She had told us that she had gone on this date, I guess a Tinder date or something, and the guy like straight up confronted her and was like insisting that she was not as tall as she said she was, that she wasn't actually like 5'11" or whatever, because obviously that would mean that he was lying about his height. But she was like, it was like literally the first interaction we had was him like getting mad at me about like and insisting I was lying.
Oh, yeah. And when guys do things like that, I'm like, how do you think this is going to go? Do you think she's going to go, you're right, and now like let's sit down to dinner and like
Men are
also
so small.
we gonna fuck? Like what do they think is going to happen?
Men are very small, pun intended. Our last question for Ask a CEO, Chelsea, is we wanted your perspective on this totally cringeworthy video by Bob Briscoe, who's the CEO of Internet Brands, which is a terrible name, but it's better known as the parent company WebMD, aka catnip for hypochondriacs, or as I like to call it, Dr. Google. But because seriously, anytime you put a symptom in WebMD, it just will 100% tell you that you're dying. But I still do it, don't I? Every time.
Oh yeah, we all do it. So at the top of 2024, Internet Brands released an internal video announcing that despite the ongoing pandemic, the employees would be required to return to the office this year. So we're going to take a look at this video. It's only 2 minutes long. And then Chelsea, we want your professional CEO take on how you would respond to the inevitable backlash from this very weird video. Let's take a look.
Many of you have come back to the office, and we've noticed it's made a big difference. Unfortunately, too big of a group hasn't returned. We're getting more serious about getting everyone back into the office for the simple reason that we're better when we're together. We move faster, we get better results, and the executives are going to tell you more about that right now.
We need you ready and present, and we need it now.
Working together face-to-face helps us create ideas faster and better.
These people are in front of a green screen. So
They really
I
are.
want to know, were y'all really in the office when you were saying we had to come back to the office?
Or were they in prison? Because like crazy.
So Chelsea, they did put out a response, the video, after it was leaked online. The backlash was so swift that they took the video off the internet and then they re-released it with a clip addressing the controversy. And it says, as to comments and criticisms on the tone and style, yeah, corporate videos are corporate videos. So I don't know. Do you think that there's a way to respond to this backlash? Because I know y'all would never do something like this because you have a 4-day work week, but
No.
Sense.
So in full transparency, so we do have a 4-day work week. We do have an office. In general, we will do 2 days a week in office, although right now it's optional. We've typically kind of gotten to a place where, like, especially during the winter spikes, like,
Yeah.
half the team is sick. We got people giving birth, like all kinds of shit is happening. So, very flexible. Most people still will go in 1 or 2 days a week. I usually have to film. And I personally, I don't like 100% remote work. It kind of depresses me a little bit. Like, I like to have 1 or 2 days a week where I get out of the house and go somewhere. So I do understand it on that level. I think that being said, this is good because I don't want anyone to come for me like, yes, we do have an office, but this kind of video, and is there a good response to it? No, in the sense that I think one thing that we have to lean even further into as an internet community, this is why the like really, really petty, low-hanging fruit cancel culture shit, quote unquote, of like, we can't all be dogpiling a 19-year-old for saying something really stupid on Twitter. We need to use that righteous indignation and that like brute force internet rage. Let's go after WebMD. Let's go after
Yes.
Pfizer. Let's go after Amazon and stuff that's like making people do this. Or, I mean, this is obviously a fairly benign example compared to the shit that corporations get away with every day. And I really do wish, like, I think if anything, yell at them more. Shame their CEO more, honestly.
Right.
But I do think, like, part of me always thinks when I see stuff like that, I'm like, yes, this is really this is the best possible iteration of social media as social tool, is like yelling, is screaming at corporations until they acquiesce.
It just was the vibe was also so strange because the people in the video don't seem like they want to go back to work. They're like, we should be in the office. We work to like they're
Well,
clearly.
and the theory is like, I work for you, and you're telling me I now have to do this video. So it's a little like I don't want to use the word hostage just because of the world we're in, but it feels like, under duress. Like
Yeah.
I guess I have to make this video because you're my boss about people coming back in. And who are you coming back in for? Who are we working faster for? You, not me. Do I get anything extra? Right. And I feel like with the work from home, the quality of life was expanded, and we realized, we can still do that and also have balance in life. So why would I give that up?
Well, also the irony of the parent company of WebMD not acknowledging that the pandemic is not over.
That part.
Like, people are still getting COVID, and like working from home is definitely a beautifully flexible. Oh, we can pause for.
New York
It's
City.
fun.
No, good old New York. Yes, I mean, listen, working from home is a luxury, but in reality, it's also a safety issue and an accessibility issue, right?
Yes.
There are people who have been permanently disabled by COVID, and being able to work from home is the only way they can do it safely and continue to be productive. And so it's just so incredibly tone deaf. And then they try to make it like jovial with like the music. It's just
Be happy about it?
It's very, very weird. I love your idea or your solution that we should use social media to like give these people shit more often. And I agree wholeheartedly.
We're always out here just tearing each other to bits about, there's nothing like the internet, like the way that like someone will go after a person who agrees with them about 99.9% of things, and also holds no power or leverage.
Yes.
Like you will, and there is something about it where like I understand it's like more satisfying, it's like more human level. It feels like you can actually get a reaction or see some sort of progress or outcome. Screaming at Amazon feels a little futile, but it truly is. That and politicians, that's where we need to be directing it.
Hell yeah. They should be scared. They should
Okay.
be worried. Can I go to dinner? Is someone gonna roll up on me and yell at me in this restaurant? As we should. Y'all work for us.
Okay. One of the other things we're really excited to talk about, Chelsea, is you're quite the accomplished author. Published. In 2013, you published I'm Only Here for the Wi-Fi, a complete guide to reluctant adulthood. Another great title, girl. Get it? And you followed that up with 2018's The Financial Diet, a total beginner's guide to getting good with money. But in 2023, you switched things up for your third book, A Perfect Vintage, which is self-published. Tell us why you decided to self-publish.
Because for a trade paperback romance novel, you make a lot more money.
Okay.
She said
But
The Financial
also-
Diet who?
Of course you did your homework.
Yes.
That
Yes.
makes sense.
But also because, I had initially shopped it out a little bit to a very, very limited pool of editors. And the genre fiction is a strange place in the sense that it's marketed very differently and produced very differently than like contemporary fiction, the books that will often sit at the front of bookstores. It's starting to change a little bit, but a lot of the creative changes and, directions that they wanted to put on my novel, like even certain genre tropes, like how the book is supposed to go narratively, certain things that it needs to really adhere to. I mean, even something like the cover, a lot of romance covers, unfortunately, are just not really to my taste. And like, I commissioned an original oil painting for that cover from an artist that I love. Like, I really wanted it to have a certain feel and a certain positioning. And I knew well enough, I did a lot of research and whatnot. And I knew that I could get into bookstores. I have foreign editions of the book. Like it's been able to sell very seamlessly. And it was a substantial investment. I invested almost $50,000 in it up front. Most of it went to, I had a team of collaborators who then I profit share with, but then I also have, a lot of investment in materials, production, all of that kind of stuff. But I knew that on the back end, like just for a point of reference, the trade paperback royalties after you earn out your advance, which is usually very low, is 7.5% per copy sold. For me, depending on the type of medium I'm selling it, I earn between 30 and 70% per copy
Wow.
sold.
She
for
just
list
said,
price.
let me do the math. The math is mathing.
The
with
math was
self-publishing.
mathing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you write when you shopped the book, because I know the process with nonfiction, oftentimes for me, like I didn't write the whole book, I just wrote a proposal and had 2 chapters written. Had you written the whole book when you started going out to publishers?
You have to for fiction
Okay.
generally, unless
Yeah.
you're like, a megastar. You generally have to write the whole book. And I ended up working with an editor at a trad publisher who loved it, disagreed with her boss on some of the creative choices, but we ended up working together on a freelance basis. And she's, I was able to thank my line editor by name, but she's listed as Jane Doe because she could maybe get fired if it.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Oh, wow. So, the Financial Diet has a new book releasing April 23rd, 2024, Beyond Getting By, The Financial Diet's Guide to Abundant and Intentional Living. And the book is written by the creative director of your company, Holly Trantham. I hope I'm saying her name
Yes,
correctly.
that's her
But you wrote the foreword. How did this book come together? And now that you have 3 books under your belt, what, if anything, did you decide to do differently this time around? And what were you able to kind of like help Holly with as she was working on this book?
Yeah. So I did do the forward in 1 chapter. It was also designed by my co-founder who designed our first book. So that was really nice to have that continuity. She is actually going to be on maternity leave when the book comes out, but hopefully she'll still be able to come to some of the parties. But yeah, I mean, I love the book process. I'm working on 2 more books right now, one traditionally published, one self-published.
Gosh,
And I really enjoy the process. And I think now that I've sort of now that I do both and I've sort of figured out, I can see through the matrix in terms of like how to optimize each book for, the financial creative balance. Like the one I'm traditionally publishing is like a very highly designed book, photography, illustration, would be very difficult to produce, would be very difficult to distribute, source, etc. Now that I'm able to kind of do that and I feel like I have a lot more leverage because I know how to do it myself, I can really enjoy the process a lot more. For my colleague, I really wanted her to write this because she's a fantastic writer and knows the business inside and out. But also I like, we have, like you mentioned, our podcast, Too Good to Be True. I don't host that. Like a lot of the stuff that we do is not me, it's other people. And I like that because there's only so many ways you can hear my perspective. I like to hear other people's, and there's also a lot of different voices featured in that book. So for her, I think, the way that I kind of worked, because obviously her writing is excellent, her editor's excellent. So for the writing itself, that was straightforward. But for me, a lot of the advice that I would give her, the ways that I would work with her is like, you got to hold these publishers to account because, it's an industry where most of the employees are overworked, underpaid. If the squeaky wheel gets the grease, like you have to advocate for your book, you have to advocate for your marketing, you have to stay on them about the cover. I mean, the cover we have now, I love it. It's gorgeous. It was an original commissioned illustrations. Your eyes would sizzle looking at the first iterations of the cover.
I can attest to that because guess who did the editing work on her book cover? Me right here, because they will tell you, to your point, they'll tell you, oh, no, it's going to cost way too much money to do it. And I'm like, that's not true. One, I know it can be done. I can edit it myself, but also they will try to steer you and say, it has to be this way. And when the reality is they are paying for it, but like it is your book and you want to make sure that you feel good about what's on the shelf. Versus, in recent years, there's been this trend of books with like blobs of color. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like the book blobs. They all look the same.
I do know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It just looked like a bunch of paint with like text on top of it.
Yeah.
It's like one book did it and now every book's doing it. And I often wonder myself, how many of those people were forced into doing that book cover versus this is the cover I really, really want?
I just need to say on that note, so my friend Ashley had a book that was very successful several years ago that had a lot of abstract colors with the title over it. And then a lot of books came out that looked just like her book and they clearly aped her title or her cover.
Wait, are you talking about Ashley's book about
Somebody's
my father?
Daughter.
Somebody's daughter, yes.
Ashley C. Ford. So,
yes. Shout out to her.
Shout out to Ashley. Hi, Ashley. Now, every time someone does a roundup of books that look like that, her book is in it. And I always feel such a like frustration of like, no, but her book was the book like that, and
And
then
so
other
maybe
books
that's
came out looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think hers is abstract color, but it does have some kind of like
It's like
illustration.
flowers.
Yeah, there's illustrations in there, but you're correct. It is one of those things where just one person's did well, and then and it's that thing of like Ashley is a fantastic writer. The cover of the book is beautiful. The cover of the book is not the sole reason the book was successful. The book
Right.
is also a good book. But unfortunately, people start kind of like doing the thing of like, well, that was successful. So now if we want our books to be successful, they also have to look like that. And it's just definitely reducing the process down to like plug and play,
100%.
bright blob colors.
I'm so sorry. Just because we're running a bit over, I just have to text someone that I'm running a
Sure.
little late. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah,
No
we're
worries.
really close to wrapping up. We're sorry.
No,
that
no, no
it's-
problem.
Okay,
I just
perfect.
want to let her know. Give me 1 second. I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
great.
Done.
Perfect. Okay.
Amazing.
All right. Well, we are super excited about your new book, and class, you can pre-order it at beyondgettingbybook.com. We've got more to talk about. We've got a few more things to talk. We've got a few more things to chat with Chelsea about, but first, let's take a quick break. And we are back. Chelsea, your TikTok has been blowing up lately, and you've really planted your flag as someone who is not afraid to share a hot take or let the internet know one thing about me. So we thought that it would be fun to share some personal things that we would like to fix round robin style, because one thing about Chelsea, whether it is the ridiculousness of wedding culture or the joys of being child-free, she is going to let the girlies know what she thinks. So since you are a guest, would you like to go first and share something that you think needs fixing out in the world?
Well, to your point about wedding culture, so I really hit the hornet's nest with that one. But I stand by everything I said. I was right, and I should say it. But one of the things that I pointed out, so like I had a 27-person wedding. It was by nature destination because my partner and I are from 2 different countries. So by nature, half those people had to travel. We paid for the accommodations. We limited it to 27. We helped with certain plane tickets. We were like, because we were not, one thing we did not want to do was make our wedding a financial burden on anyone else. Now, I understand that even still, it was probably burdensome for some. It's probably still a big expense for others, whatever. But it was very important through that process. We did no gifts. We had no registry, like none of that stuff. We fed everyone. We kept everyone for a week. We put them up for a week in a villa.
Wow.
So point being, that is a very high standard, although it wasn't that expensive compared to a lot of weddings because we did everything like very DIY. But I do think that so much of wedding culture is just completely negligent about offloading expenses to your guests and to especially your bridal party. Those numbers have skyrocketed over the past 20 years. So many things that are must-dos now didn't exist 20 years ago, even. A lot of this, I think, is social media. But one thing I pointed out in particular, so I didn't have any bridal party because 27 people, what are you going to do? It's a little silly. Everyone's special. But I was a bridesmaid recently. I've been a bridesmaid before, but I was a bridesmaid recently. And in this instance, the bride was like, I want you to wear, it was 3 of us. She was like, something in a color green, any shade of green is fine. Any kind of outfit is fine. We actually all ended up wearing pants, but she was like, whatever you want. And if you don't have something that you like, I will give you a stipend to buy something. And I said on my TikTok, I was like, to me, that should be the standard of if you want someone to wear a specific outfit, you should have to buy it for them.
Absolutely.
I really believe that.
Yes, especially if I love green personally, but I know green is not everybody's color. So you're asking someone to buy something that they might not ever wear again. And, bridesmaid dresses are expensive. They are not something that
100%.
and they're not something you're going to wear all the time unless you're going to like a lot of formal events. I agree. You should absolutely pay, or to your point, offer a stipend to cover a portion of the cost.
Well, and that's already to say green, any shade, any shape, anything, like that is already leagues beyond what most bridesmaids get, which is like, here's this ugly dress that you've never chosen for yourself in a color. I will never forget, recently a friend was at a wedding and she sent me a picture of the bridesmaids and they were all wearing solid, like floor length, like coral colored column dresses. And she was like, this literally looks like 5 pieces of salmon nigiri standing next to this bride. I know that none of these women are ever wearing this dress again. And she looked it up and the dress was like Like these are expensive dresses.
Well, and here's the thing: if you're in
yeah.
more than one wedding, that's like over your adult lifetime. That's thousands of dollars, right?
Well,
and don't be single. Don't be single and have to go all those damn weddings.
Here's a fix for this. One of my first jobs out of college, I worked with a girl, and she was in a little group of friends, and they were all getting married within the same like year of each other, and they all picked the same bridesmaid's dress so that they could use it multiple times. And it was a black dress. It was very simple, but it was like very elegant, and it was the type of thing that you could wear multiple times as a guest, or if you were going to a black tie event. And I was like, I didn't have, I mean, look, I got divorced, so shout out to me for not having an expensive wedding. I could see the future, but I didn't have a bridal party. And to think that you were like, okay, I'm going to spend it on this one thing, because I know girls who've been in 3 and 4 weddings in 1 year. It's really expensive.
It's too much. It's way too much.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. Well, I think that is a great fix. I'm sorry that people were eating you up on TikTok, but once again, run them numbers up, because make sure you got that 1 minute video, and you're in the creator fund so that you can get your coins off people being upset. Because one thing about me.
Fact. Oh no, please.
I was gonna say one thing about me. They gonna stay mad, and I will stay paid.
And
so,
and Fran's gonna make content out of them being mad. Okay.
Exactly.
Fun fact: I can't qualify for the creator fund because I guess I must have started my TikTok while I was in Spain, and now it registers me as being in Spain, and you can't ever change that again. According to
what?
Yeah. Oh, I know.
That's crazy.
Oh my God, that's really messed up. I already have a topic picked out, but that would be my topic if I could go back, because that's really annoying. So TikTok's profiting off of your viral TikToks, and you're not. So that's a bummer. Damn. Dawn, do you have a fix for the expensive bridal party outfits?
So I've only been in 2 weddings, and to your point, Chelsea, 3 weddings, and 2 of my friends gave the tuxes. They were like, here are what the tuxes are, go pick it up and pay for it. My fix is like elope and have a party, right? Mm-hmm. Like if it's really about people celebrating, I know people do this. Somebody I just worked with just told me that they did this, but celebrate. Everyone wants us to celebrate. We're going to get you gifts anyway. Tell us it's a destination party or whatever. But don't ask people to do all of that. I think it's just too much. So I'd say elope and just have a party. We all are there for the cake and for dancing anyway, like honestly, and for the alcohol. So let's just like jump to that part.
Dawn, is it okay if I go next?
Please do.
Okay, so my thing that I'm annoyed about is talkative Uber drivers. I have gotten into so many Ubers where I'm leaving a meeting and they're like, what was the meeting about? And I'm like, I don't want to talk to you about what the meeting was about, or what do you do for a living? And then I'm like, actually, I'm really stressed out about my career right now. I don't want to talk about this. I did learn that there is quiet mode on the Uber app, but it only is for if you get an Uber Black, meaning the most expensive car. And I think that this is an opportunity for a business to corner this section of the market. They could call the company Quiet Car, and it's just a car service that is silent. And you could even have, certain filters. For example, I don't want to talk about politics. I'm open to talking, but I don't want to talk about that. I'm open to talking about music. I'm not open to talking about work. I don't want to talk about family. I had an Uber driver the whole time talk to me about why I should hurry up and have kids. And I was like, I just want to get to the airport. Like, I don't want to talk to you about this. And I think that should be an option that's, if not a whole brand, it should be available to all Uber passengers. What if you're coming back from, like, I don't know, you just lost your job or you had a death in the family? I don't want to talk to you, and I shouldn't have to explain why I don't want to talk. It should just be respected of, I'm really not in the mood right now. I can't do this. Mm-hmm. But I always feel like awkward saying that in a car. And so having the option to like put it on the app beforehand, I think would be really beneficial.
Chelsea, do you find that you are also spoken to a lot in Ubers? Because I'm wondering if it's a female thing, because they don't speak to me as much. They don't, honestly.
I am such a talkative person, though.
She's like, I'm talking to
Also-
them.
Okay, you're the one
Yes.
who's chatting them up. You're making it
I-
worse for the rest of us.
I am making it worse, especially so my friends make fun of me for this. So I have been really aggressively learning Spanish for the past couple of years, and a lot of, especially when I'm in Miami, a lot of drivers of car services are Spanish speaking, native, and many of them don't speak English. And I would always like get into my friend when I was there with some friends. They made fun of me because when I would get into the car, like I would go really far out of my way to like really well pronounce their name and like say hello with like a quasi accent so that they would be like, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" And I'm like, "Funny you should ask." Yes, I do. Let's have 30 minutes of immersion conversation. while they're
Oh
just sitting there on their
my
phone.
God.
Chelsea,
You know
yo
what?
hablo español.
I was about to say, Delon is simpatico with you on that one because I know for a fact he's in the Uber chatting up
We
in
just were in
Spanish.
Spain last year, and I had the longest. When we came back from Cancun, I talked to the guy who was driving me to the airport for 30 minutes because I was like,
The best.
I can practice my Spanish, right? That's why I'm here, to practice the Spanish. Well, also to celebrate a friend,
Okay,
I
but
guess,
when I'm not okay, I am on day 5 of Duolingo. I had a streak for 2 seconds. Delon,
you
I
gotta
don't
get
know
that
how
freeze, girl. You gotta get that freeze.
I don't know how you do it. I am not a Spanish speaker. I only speak English. But I've just had many times where like I'm just not in the mood. And again, I've had instances with drivers that have gotten an attitude when I said, "I'm sorry, like I have a headache," and then I'm like, "Oh my God, this is a safety issue." Now I'm in a car with this motherfucker and you know where I live. And now I feel like I'm in danger. You know what I mean? Like, so I wish I
Totally.
could just say quiet car only.
I think that's the best fix for that. I mean, my solution is always just to honestly pretend like I didn't hear them and just keep scrolling in my phone.
And put headphones
or
in.
I have my Bose headphones on and I just didn't hear you, right? So that would be my
Mhm.
like immediate personal fix for that. But I think the quiet mode is brilliant and they need to expand it.
All right, Dawn, take us home.
Yeah, so for me, the thing that I'm rubbing up against is tipping culture. So if you go to a Sweet Green, if you go to a Starbucks, if you go to even a local coffee shop, it's all about, and it's in the little kiosk where you like, I tap my little watch and it's like, how much do you want to tip? And it's not that I'm above tipping, but if you are at a restaurant and there's I see you doing something, I see you, an actual service or labor around it. Yeah, but I don't always want to tip the barista because all you did was put the coffee in the cup and put some cream in there. But I feel a lot of pressure at the till, at the service station in the transaction to actually pay. So I often do tip. But I'm trying to convince myself that like I don't have to and push back on that. So that's the thing I'm rubbing up against. And I actually am trying to find a way to engage the service person so that I feel better about tipping. I'm like, at least talk to me.
So that they earn it.
Yeah.
Listen, my fix is y'all need to start paying people more because if people are relying on tips to get by, that is the fault of the employer.
100%.
They should be making sure that people are making a living wage so that a tip is like a nice little bonus, not like, oh my God, I'm so upset that I didn't get a tip because I'm not making that much per hour at wherever it is that they're working.
Right. Do you have a fix for that, Chelsea?
Okay, I generally agree. Yes, I also think it's gotten so out of control that even like very well paid people are getting into like tipping culture, like not professional services. Maybe like you're not, you're like CPA isn't turning around a little kiosk to be like, you want to tip.
Right.
But that being said, like I think there's very much like the other problem too is that you don't always know necessarily where it's going. Like, for example,
Right.
like if we're having some work done in our home, you always must tip in cash to the actual workers, because if you give it to the company on your card, you have no idea if it's actually getting distributed to those people. So always tip directly to the people and in cash so you can ensure that it goes to the right people is definitely a big recommendation. But I personally think for like, we got to outlaw it for anything that doesn't require like an actual service.
Yes.
Like it can't just be like you're at a shoe store and they ring you up and it's like, do you want a tip? Like we got to at least eliminate that, because if nothing else, because I do still see some argument. Like I was a barista for a very long time. I loved my tips, and this was pre all of that culture. So I do still love it, but I think we're getting so far out ahead of our skis that we at least got to eliminate it from certain industries because it's getting ridiculous.
I do appreciate that we don't know where it's going either. That's a really good point.
I think that is a very, very good point, because we do definitely see people that say they have to. I've never worked in a restaurant before, but I've heard from people that sometimes your tip ends up going into like one big pot and then gets distributed to everybody. So it's like, well, I'm giving better service to my tables than that person, but like we're all benefiting from my tips. Like, how is that okay?
Pooled tips are a controversial thing. I did work in restaurants, and I see both sides, I'll say.
Okay. Yeah. See, and again, I've never done it before, but like I can assume that I would be the person that would be like, well, my tables love me, so that's my tip.
Right. Well, your tables would love you, but Fran would like be late with all the food still.
No, I would be, I don't trust myself that I would not drop things. I feel like that's where I would
I feel like you
up.
would be like the stand-up routine, and then they'd be like, but where's
my food? I'm like, anybody from Florida? Like, I'm doing a tight five at the table. Well, Chelsea, this has been so fantastic. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. Before we end, please let everybody know where they can find you on the interwebs, and if there's anything else that you would like to plug in addition to the upcoming Financial Diet book.
No, that'll be it. The Financial Diet is just everywhere at the Financial Diet, and I'm just like you. I detoxed from Twitter last year, so I'm just on Instagram and TikTok at Fagan Chelsea. So I hope to see you there.
Amazing. So now, class, we would love to hear from you. How do you feel about your finances? Do you feel like you're well equipped to handle them? Are you out here using Afterpay on things that you should not be using Afterpay for? You can be honest with us. We will not judge you. Or maybe you would like to suggest a TV show, a celeb, or a brand that you think we should fix in a future episode. Hit us up on Instagram at FixItPod or email us, lemmefixitpod@gmail.com.
And do not forget, we now have a YouTube channel. Visit youtube.com/@FixItPod to watch this week's episode and see our lovely faces. And if you enjoyed this episode, as always, please give us a rating on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app. This was Let Me Fix It. I'm Delon.
I'm Franchesca. And this was Let Me Fix It with Chelsea Fagan.